work that I'm doing right now is a trilogy, and the first book has been completed, and I'm in the process of developing the second book. This is a book that I printed and bound myself. The end papers are screen printed. When I open up to the text block, I have an etching, collage work, pencil drawing, some more screen print. So a lot of the work that I do starts out as one thing, and then I start to make pages. When I've collated and created my text block, I then start to draw back into it. It goes through a lot of transformations creating my books.
Do you see book arts as an inherently mixed media art form?
Yes. Historically, book arts have a tendency to be considered this high-level printing production, working with an artist such as Chagall, and the two team up together and they create an artist book. Well, I'm trying to do something that is very approachable and very accessible, where I take prints that I've done, create a text block, and I work back into them.
What's a text block?
A text block is the pages in between the boards or the cover. So the text block is this section of the book.
That's one text block.
This is one text block. This is silk screened printed silk book cloth. This silk book cloth is so much fun to work with. Besides the book cloth, I've also used a silk screen print that I went back into with gouache and ink. And that's how I've created my cover. Another screen print, but I've treated it differently with the gouache. The fun thing about this text block is that actually the boards are integrated into the sewing of the text block. So it's all becomes one unit. The other thing that I like to do when I work with books is sometimes introduce another weight paper. Here I've used an Asian paper.
So thin!
And I've screen printed on it, and it acts as a diffuser or another way to sense what's behind it and gives you an opportunity to think about the imagery a little differently. In other places, I like to actually create holes. This gives you a chance to go deeper into the book, but it's a little bit of a teaser. It's like, what's happening there? When you finally turn the page, you get the reveal. But then what begins to happen is that same hole creates a new experience on the other side of the book. So this is also another Asian paper. And this time, instead of just one sheet, I decided to use a couple of sheets. And they're different sizes. They're not the same size as the overall text block, because that's the one thing you get to do when you're making artist books is you can design and create page sizes that please you.
That paper is so crazy thin. Oh. The way you make the book, it's not linear. We turn the page, we see the next thing, but we also see what happened with that hole
right
on the other side. So it's actually more of a ping pong effect in a way.
Yes, and that's one of the things that I like about books is you do have the ability to introduce pacing and different ways for somebody to go through imagery.
The sequence.
It's the sequence.
You're in control of that.
Yes, and I find that's really fun and fascinating and lets people have very different points of view. This format for volume 2 is going to be a square format. And when I actually eventually get to book 3, it's going to be a horizontal. The first thing that I do when I'm thinking about my books is I need to come up with a mock-up so that I can start to formalize and design what it is that I want the book to do structurally. This past April, I had an opportunity to do an artist residency in Dublin at the Graphic Studio Dublin. And that's where I worked on a number of copper etchings with an artist by the name of Vida. The beginning of a lot of my explorations. These are the images that I want to work with, but I don't want them to be like photographs in a photo book. I want them to be integrated. So if you look here, I started to think about how my prints can sit amongst a background, but it's imagery that comes from shipbuilding. It's actually a blow up of a rope, and I use a lot of rope in the work that I do. This is basically sketching in 3D. I'm also working with woodcuts. So that's a woodcut that I did a while ago, thinking about water, but it also potentially looks like land. How do these all interact and play with each other? This is the next iteration of that first sketch that I showed you, thinking about lighter colors and how these pieces can come into play with other imagery.
Is this one silkscreen?
That's silkscreen, high transparency with very little pigment in it. I'm working with a wood block, and the fun thing about wood blocks is that you can actually carve on both sides. This imagery is these bottom two. This is, so far, this is my first proof. I'm not positive it satisfies what I want to do yet.
So that woodcut is this
Yes.
block.
And this wood is called Sheena.
It's from McLean's.
Yes.
Japanese wood block?
I'm throwing the question back to you. What do you mean by Japanese wood block?
I don't know. It just looks very thin, and I'm not used to woodcut looking so thin, or is that just the Sheena?
I think that's the Sheena that allows you to work really thinly.
Oh, were those the plates?
So these are 3 of the plates, and I've done a little bit of aquatint on here and etching. And
Is that the little dots?
well, those little dots actually are dry point.
Cute little packages for the copper plates.
Yes.
Why are that pretty?
You don't want them to get scratched. This one has an aquatint on it. That's in these areas.
And is the rest line etching?
Yes. I was in Graphic Studio Dublin working with Vida, and so we were testing out colors and playing with the imagery. So this really gives me a chance to think about what the work looks like by itself, but then I can also play around with what is it going to look like when it's integrated with other plates. I have a notebook here, and this was what I used when I was in Dublin, things to work with that Vida was advising me on. And then as the plates started to develop, I then would take photocopies and I would sketch on them. And then since I have come back, I have started to do a little more into the plates, but I've wanted to see how they would look with screen prints interacting with screen printing. But I take lots and lots of photocopies so that
copies. Why are you doing that?
because I want to keep playing with them. And I also, with my book, am able to then lay them out in many different orientations.